With us today are Mitch Carmichael, who's Secretary of the West Virginia Department of Economic Development. Mitch, former Senate President as well. And as I told him earlier, probably the most high-flying guy in Charleston right now with all these big announcements that have been happening. Next to Mitch is Erienne Olesh. She's with West Virginia University, and I'm going to make sure I get Office of Student and Faculty Innovation. So we hope to learn more about that here shortly. And then Bill Bissett with the President of the West Virginia Manufacturers Association. So, Mr. Carmichael, would you like to just give a quick introduction and talk about some of the great things happening in West Virginia?
Sure. Is the microphone on?
Yes.
Make sure you can hear. Again, I am Mitch Carmichael, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And I've been here in various roles over the years. You know, I've been here as minority leader, majority leader, Senate President, and now Cabinet Secretary for Economic Development. And it's been a pleasure to see the evolution in West Virginia's economic development toolbox, really. We came in years ago to try to make fundamental changes that will align West Virginia with the rest of the nation in a manner that we can attract and retain great jobs, great opportunities for our citizens who deserve them just as much as anywhere else in the world. And so those changes have now, you're seeing the fruition, all those changes come to fruition. And West Virginia has the best value package to take to the nation and the world, as you saw earlier this week, to attract world-class companies to our state and to energize the economy and the development and the initiatives that are ongoing in our state. And so thank you for your willingness to cover those great events and to create that enthusiasm that is contagious, that creates and feeds upon itself to create that ecosystem of growth, jobs, and opportunities. So it's a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Ms. Olesh?
Hi, can you hear me, or do I need to scoot forward a little
Maybe
bit?
forward just a little bit.
Lean forward a little bit.
There you go.
Okay. Is this better? Okay. Apologies if I sound a little nasally. I was telling somebody earlier, my kids, I have a 7 and a 3-year-old, got me a great pair of slippers in the flu for Christmas, so I'm just trying to recover from that. But you know, petri dishes, what can you do but love them? But first of all, thank you for having me here today. Wonderful to be here, especially on such a beautiful day. The drive down from Morgantown was absolutely gorgeous. But I've had the pleasure of working with both of these gentlemen before, and really am looking forward to continuing to build that relationship across the state. I won't take too long, and Bill should cut me off absolutely if I start rambling, because I get excited about this topic because it is something I'm passionate about. But we heard Speaker Hanshaw at the beginning of the morning talk about, you know, we need to be celebrating our wins and talking about our wins, and we have had some tremendous ones, especially this week as a state. And so I want to talk about 3 areas where we have made some great progress over the last few years. And in the lens, just so you know, the perspective I'm coming from, I work with startup companies, I work with faculty who are innovators and entrepreneurs who are trying to build, you know, what we call deep tech startup companies, right? Like the technology that's at the cutting edge of their field. And so I want to talk about 3 wins that we've had and 3 areas where we can look for continued growth. And I won't take too long, I promise, because your questions are more important probably than what I will say here. But why is this an important topic? Well, if you look at our state's portfolio of our businesses, 98% of businesses in West Virginia are small businesses and startup companies. And those 98% employ 50% of our workforce in West Virginia. So we're not talking about a topic that's affecting 2-3% of our population. 50% of our workforce are employed by this sector of companies, so small businesses and startup companies. So things that we've done, I think, exceptionally well. A few years ago, the state passed the SBIR STTR matching fund. Again, I won't go into that rabbit hole, but those are competitive federal grants that 11 federal agencies award to startup companies working on research and technology development. And the state, I think, demonstrated a really great commitment to startup companies and small businesses by matching those federal dollars up to 50%. So that's a fantastic program. Second, the state entrepreneurship ecosystem. If you aren't familiar with that yet, please look up the West Virginia Business Link website. That's kind of where all of the resources have been immortalized of our entrepreneurship ecosystem. That was co-founded a few years ago by Bill Woodrum and Tara St. Clair, 2 wonderful colleagues and friends of mine. But, you know, and I've spent my career looking at other universities, other states, how they organize innovation and entrepreneurial resources. I have yet to find one that comes close to what we have in West Virginia. And so I do think that that's something we really need to celebrate. And then the third is, I always jokingly say when I'm talking to faculty, I think it's one of the best kept secrets of West Virginia, that it shouldn't be a secret. It is so easy to register a business in West Virginia. It is so accessible, and I think that really empowers our state to be able to create their own businesses, create their own job opportunities, which I really do believe is an important part to kind of our economic prosperity, especially when we look over the next decade. Okay, so 3 great things, and then areas where I think we need to continue to push the envelope. We need to continue making sure that we are investing in our small businesses and our startup companies, whether that looks like some incentives or promotions for them. We can look to examples like Pennsylvania, where they have the Ben Franklin State-Run Investment Fund, right? West Virginia is still a venture capital desert, and so for states like ours, it's important that we have a way of continuing to empower those small businesses. The second, we know that a lot of innovation, cutting-edge research takes place at university campuses across the country, and that's so important for states like West Virginia, but also just in general across as a nation to maintain our competitive edge, especially kind of with interesting things going on in the global atmosphere that we won't dive into today. So I think continuing to find ways where we can support and promote and lift up all universities and institutions across the state is very, very important. And then the third, and again, yesterday I think was a great example of how the state is doing this, but continue to drive and bring industry into the state. When we look at startup companies, again, especially those deep tech startup companies, they're not building products just to build products. They're building them for a customer, and a lot of times that customer is large industry. So the more industrial partners we can bring to the state, obviously that's immediate impact on jobs and economic development, which is great. But I also really see that as a great and strong way to have a long-tailed catalytic effect on our startup economy. So just some ideas, but happy to kind of elaborate or take any questions about those.
Thank you, Mr. Bissett.
Thanks very much. My name is Bill Bissett. I'm the president of the West Virginia Manufacturers Association. This is day 4 in the job, so please take it easy on your questions. I'll do my best. But very appreciative of the invite. Thanks to Betsy and her whole team for the invitation, and always been a big fan of the West Virginia Press Association. As somebody with a master's in journalism who believes in the Fourth Estate, I want to communicate with you like I have through all my career. We want to be as transparent as possible. We want to be responsive as quickly as possible, understanding your deadlines. But the other thing I would say is I also think that you don't want to talk to the guy in the suit anymore. I think you want to talk to, as a friend in Kentucky would say, the muddy boots and dirty hands that are actually doing the work as we can, because you're going to get a better answer in a way. I mean, I am an advocate, and I'm proud of what I do. I'm a public relations professional, but I will do my best to get you with the people that are actually doing the work, because 1, I think it's a more interesting story, and 2, they can tell their story better. Thank you, Randy. But it's a challenge, but it's one that I'm willing to accept and do my best with. But as to the manufacturers, what job could be more exciting than mine right now? The announcement of LG this week. Secretary Carmichael stealing my thunder yet again. I haven't even got down. No. But he's right. I mean, when you can sit in a room, in my previous role with Senator Capito as state director, when you can sit in a room and this meeting didn't happen quickly. This got going back to another company where you have 2 U.S. senators, 2 people in fatigues that are general rank officers, a governor, 2 university presidents, numerous business leaders saying, "We want you here." That's exciting. There's not a lot of states in the union that can do that, and that kind of weight comes quickly. And seeing the expression, Secretary, as you did, on the faces of these people who in some cases have never been to West Virginia before, go, wow, this is a lot of high-powered people in a room wanting us in West Virginia, investing here, being involved, being engaged. But the other side of that is the existing businesses we have. Retention of those businesses, how they can benefit from these same resources, has to be part of the question as well. We start, obviously, the legislative session next week, gearing up aggressively for that. But again, I want to be accessible to you. I greatly appreciate the invitation. And it's an exciting time for manufacturing, an exciting time for the economic, I think, future of my home state.
Excellent. I guess we can start with Mr. Carmichael. Earlier, and a question for all 3 of you, obviously, but earlier in our initial session, 2 areas of critical importance to new development and existing development with companies were brought up, and that was child care and housing and affordable housing. From a standpoint of promoting economic development or working with your members, where do those issues rank in the challenges our state has right now?
Yeah. child care and housing. So I can tell you, once a company has decided to locate in West Virginia and invest substantial resources in our state and attract a world-class workforce to whatever discipline they're pursuing, then those issues become important. I will say child care is both those issues are nationwide issues. They're both on the national stage, housing and child care. And you're seeing national legislation to try to address those issues. In West Virginia, we want to solve problems, first. We want to get to it first. And so we have put together, and the State Chamber of Commerce helped craft a bill last year to incentivize additional child care child care entity formations. And then they created the Build West Virginia Act, which has some, perfection that could be, anything that just comes to fruition in 1 year can, be perfected and be improved. And so I'll say West Virginia is attacking those two vital issues. They are prominent in decision-making process, but more so after the companies have decided to locate.
I mean, from the child care perspective, again, I mentioned, my little petri dishes at home. But so, as a mom, I certainly have felt the struggle of finding childcare myself. But I also think this is an area where you have to remember most childcare in the state, those are small businesses, those are startup companies. So I think, again, we can kind of lift all boats here, rising tide, and whatever we can do to help support small businesses and startup companies should also in turn help support those childcare efforts so we can create more of them, make it a more robust system. So, I think there's a lot of great work to do, but I certainly think that it is an important topic, especially when we look to the future.
I'm hearing the issue of child care is important not only to our legislature. When you talk to the EDAs around the state, when you talk to businesses, it's a constant message. But really the message is more nuanced than that. And your question's right on target, but really it comes down to employee participation. It comes down to a workforce that is going to work. And this is not an attempt to attack anybody who's on assistance or disability or anything of that nature, but we have to remove impediments to them finding gainful employment, much like the Secretary said. That can be childcare, that can be transportation, that can be housing, and that's not just for new employers. Those are also for the small businesses you just heard about who struggle as well. We're hearing this universally. So how do we address that? I think one way is to remove those impediments like we talked about. It could be longer hours for childcare. It could be one factor in it. If I have to travel to childcare to drop off my child, I have 10, 12-year-old little girls, I better mention, that, when you have to do that, I may need a longer window than 8 hours of childcare. It may be even wider than that. So how do we consider that, not only in a regulatory sense, but also in a support sense for those structures that provide it? But beyond that, I think we've got to consider that we have multi-generational assistance in this state. And as somebody from Southern West Virginia who loves that neck of the woods, we've got to consider that. I've talked to a circuit judge who told me of a family with 6 generations of assistance. How do we change the culture if you as a young person has never had a working person in your life? I mean, that's daunting to me, but it's something I think, and it's not something necessarily everything can be addressed in this capital, but when you talk about new employers and they're wondering who to hire, I want them to hire as many West Virginians as they can and not Ohioans. We have a vested interest in that. But it's a real challenge, but I think, much like the Secretary said, giving those tools that we can to help employers, to help employees find that road to employment has got to happen. But I think there's a huge educational process, because I really think if you're not wanting to get a job after high school, if you complete it, you're definitely not going to want post-secondary education. So to me, it's a riddle that has to be solved in 2 ways.
Next, Steve. I want to follow up a little bit with what you said, Mr. Bissett, on participation. Earlier, I think Senate President Blair mentioned that unemployment applications recently were lower than expected, which is a good thing. But of course, that does come down to, is it just fewer people who are now eligible to apply, et cetera. But when we get into that, West Virginia has long held the stigma of half of the available workforce not being in the labor pool. When it comes to economic development, with that stigma that's out there nationally, is that an impediment? What are the challenges that those factors bring in landing companies or servicing existing companies here in the state?
It's a great question, and it's one that it almost makes me not discuss it in a room full of journalists, because I actually worry that the more it gets out, the more it could harm the efforts of Secretary Carmichael and others to attract employers here. Because when you hear Dr. John Deskins of WU talk about this, and he is extremely passionate about this issue, this is not just a single age group or demographic. This is across the board. I remember a presentation where he told me that we have a lock on the bottom ranking in workforce participation since the 70s. So this is not a new problem for West Virginia. It's one we have to address, and Secretary Carmichael's right, it's a national issue, but it's like we're already behind in the race as we run it. Like we already started several yards behind. So we've got to figure that out. I think our universities are a major component. Post-secondary education is a major component in this. But you know, again, I think it's like a lot of things in life. We have to identify the problem. How is it happening? How is it continuing? And then the best we can give public and private resources to address it. I am concerned that we, you know, even though, you know, Deskins has a great grasp on this, I'm not sure we completely understand it, because again, we're also addressing the aspect of stereotype, which concerns me a great deal, which means it may not even be reality, but it's what not only the outside world thinks about it, but what we think about ourselves. So that concerns me as well.
Sure.
Well, a couple things. Yes, we have a low workforce participation rate, and it hasn't stopped companies from coming here. It's an impediment once they get here, and to say, you know, we want people to work. America needs productive citizens to create, you know, an economy that will foster itself long term and sustain, you know, our way of life. In West Virginia, the jobs will get filled with West Virginians. You know, I keep hearing this concept about who's going to fill all these jobs that we're creating here in West Virginia. A, it's a great problem to have, and B, those jobs will be filled with West Virginians. Something else that Bill touched on about this generational concept of assistance. West Virginia is one of only 10 states in America that will provide no-cost community and technical college education for any citizen of West Virginia that wants to develop a skill, to take a marketable skill to go to the workforce and to take to the marketplace. And that is a big attraction for employers throughout America, to say, we know we can train a workforce in West Virginia, that the state will participate in assisting that training component. And it's a real advantage to break that cycle, Bill, and to return to the workforce productive citizens that maybe previously had not been, or didn't see a path forward. Because, you know, we're all so blessed, but there are those who try to enter the workforce where $1,000 is an impediment, or, you know, the opportunity for childcare or transportation to that facility. Those are real impediments that lock people in a cycle of poverty. And we in West Virginia have figured out a way to break that cycle and give every citizen an opportunity to enter into this expanding, growing economy in our state.
Ms. Olesh, anything you'd like to add? Okay, perfect. Stephen?
Steve Adams, Ogden Newspapers here. This is probably a question for both you and the Secretary, particularly in light of LG making their announcement, because you talk about entrepreneurship and just being kind of an entrepreneurship startup desert when it comes to financing, that sort of thing. I know some of us, when we saw the LG announcement, were expecting a big manufacturing announcement that they're going to make TVs or whatnot, but what they did announce was funding for their NOVA program, which is a very huge program that deals with startups and entrepreneurships and funding ideas. Is there a potential for this LG program, once they get it rolling and get these hubs started, to reverse that particular issue and make West Virginia attractive for that type of angel investing and for pushing those ideas? Because if LG sees some potential in West Virginia for that sort of thing, could that bring others here to turn this into an oasis versus a desert? Thank you.
So yes, I think that if anybody here who has worked with a startup company or knows how startup company financing works. Your hardest investor you will ever work for is your first investor, okay? Getting that first person to believe in you, to invest in your company, will be the hardest dollar that your company has to work for. But so I think that is a good analogy to what we're seeing with LG. And we've already seen over the last couple of years, I've been on plenty of visits with investors from large metropolitan areas, from Silicon Valley and Boston, who have come and visited West Virginia because they're catching wind that something exciting is happening here, right? And so I think that the great work that the state did in really being able to catalyze and memorialize LG coming here, I think that is the big start to hopefully what I think is going to be a windfall of other investors. Because it takes one, right? And then I think more will follow. But we had some investors on campus about maybe a month and a half ago. Jack Thompson, who's our wonderful director of corporate relations, brought them down, and they're investors that have visited the state before and visited with a lot of people in the state, and they said, we love it here. We love the people. We see the potential here. They said, but if you can stop saying we're the up and coming state, they said, you have up and come. They said, we would not be here if you were still kind of on your way. And so I do think to some extent it's also, we now need to start telling that story ourselves. And we need to start saying, no, we are here. We have companies that are nationally competitive, internationally competitive for investment. And so I do think that the LG will bring hopefully more notoriety and help highlight that.
Yeah, I don't think from a press perspective you can overcover or overstate the significance of LG coming to West Virginia. I mean, you're talking about a Fortune 200 company, 75,000 worldwide employees, $200 billion in annual revenue, which just for perspective is twice West Virginia's entire gross domestic product output on an annual basis. The chairman of that corporation was here with us 2 days ago in this facility, thrilled to be in West Virginia and to inaugurate this Appalachian Innovation Corridor. And the investment fund that they've in fact already titled it the West Virginia Innovation Fund. And not only and so I've heard some of the coverage, and I've seen some of the coverage from other venues and so forth saying, well, what are they doing? What was it really about? Because so often here in West Virginia, we're used to, heavy metal, heavy work, manufacturing. Those are great jobs, and we've recruited a bunch of them. This is the augmentation and the diversification of West Virginia's economy that we have all sought for so many years. And this is the moment, and they are investing $700 million initially in West Virginia, committed to creating a minimum of 275 jobs. Over 150 of those jobs are guaranteed and committed to pay over $125,000 a year. And this innovation flywheel that we have seen work in Silicon Valley, these jobs could have gone anywhere in the world. They chose West Virginia, and they are thrilled to be here. You cannot imagine how happy and how impressed the entire contingent from Korea and some of the others that were here to see what's occurring in West Virginia. As you said, West Virginia has arrived, and the story is now leaking out. And so we're thrilled to be a part of it and to live in this moment in time when we're seeing the renaissance and experiencing the renaissance of the West Virginia economy. This is our moment, and it feels so good to be a part of. And I think we'll all look back and say, those were the days when they did all they could to move West Virginia forward, and it worked, and it's growing and prospering, and people's lives will be improved and changed as a result of these investments, and particularly this LG investment.
What just as a follow-up to that, what is, and we had a similar level of excitement when Virgin came in with the Virgin Hyperloop. Of course, that project may be a little too far ahead of its time. What is the difference with this one and that project? I'll look at it. Can you explain that? I had someone ask me that question yesterday.
Yeah, there's a firm MOA commitment. There is an actual document signed by a Fortune 200 company that commits to performance or paying it back, paying the incentive package back. So this is like, you have the reputation of a Fortune 200 company that this culture that they operate in values nothing more highly than their reputation. And This is, an actual world-class company commitment with a legal document backing it up, prepared by someone in this room.
Can I jump in on that?
Sure, 100%.
Something I bring up a lot, and as somebody that used to work in the coal industry and has seen the seismic changes within the coal industry, I think sometimes we forget in the private sector the nature of risk, that things change, that markets change, that the industries themselves change. And it was funny, as somebody who would talk to journalists when I was in the industry who never covered the coal industry, I would often compare it to the media, to what's going on in journalism in your industry, because things have changed immensely. And the nature of newsrooms, the nature of the profession, the scope of things have all changed. And I think will continue to change. But I don't think we can undervalue the nature of risk. But de-risking, I think, these examples like Secretary Carmichael talks about is so important. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at companies with a track record, especially Nucor, which I was very fortunate with Senator Capito to kind of be somewhat on the ground floor of their engagement. Just fascinating to watch them, their success elsewhere, and I think the success they're going to bring here. But it is still the private sector. There is risk involved, but Lord, the reward is tremendous, especially in that repairing that reputation of a place to do business and a good place to do business, which is now West Virginia.
Question in the back here? 1 second. Let's get the mic back. I'm having a hard time hearing.
Stephen Smoot, Pendleton Times. The state's tourism industry in the last few years has countered all the national trends and has expanded so much. And myself, and I know that folks back in Pendleton County are curious to know, are there any tourism benefit initiatives coming from the legislature or the governor this year?
Well, I can say from the governor's perspective, he is the world's, I started to say biggest advocate for tourism, but he is an incredible advocate for the tourism industry, and he has led the initiative to energize and to buck the national trends as it relates to tourism. And Secretary Ruby, you could not pick a better leader of that organization as well. So there is never a meeting that occurs at the governor's level that doesn't include a conversation about tourism. And no place more prominent than Pendleton County and some of those other areas. And so you can rest assured that there is an incredible emphasis on the tourism industry in our state. And sorry to jump in on that. Yeah.
And again, Stephen, I think you look at the New River Gorge, park designation changes everything in a lot of ways. When you look at the people coming here now, and to overlap that with what we're talking about economic development. If you come here, if you see West Virginia and see how beautiful it is, how welcome. If you break down the side of the road, 3 people will stop, and it'll probably creep you out if you're from somewhere else. But when you truly engage, and it's not what you've heard, but what you see in West Virginia, I think that changes minds. So I think there is a real, obviously tourism is an industry, but getting people here, I think, is part of the future of us.
Perfect. I guess, Ms. Olesh, I'll throw a question your way. You, I think in some comments you've made prior, you've noted that states and universities, in this particular instance, obviously West Virginia University, Marshall, need to become better partners to create opportunities for economic development. Give an example or two of what's being done elsewhere, but not here, that if it's implemented would be beneficial to West Virginia.
That's a great question. So, I do think, I'm actually trying to think, because I'm like, gosh, I think we actually do that better than most other places that I know of, to be quite honest with you. I can even think of a handful of examples, again, in the world that I live in, a lot of what we do is we go after federal funding, right? So there's recently the EDA Tech Hubs, the NSF Regional Innovation Engines, the EDA Build Back Better Regional Challenges. I can't think of an instance where there has not been at least 2 West Virginia universities that have collaborated on those grant proposals and applications, many of which have been very successful. And so honestly, I'm really struggling to think of a place that kind of does that cross-university collaboration better. I work with a lot of schools. Well, maybe I shouldn't throw any states under the bus in particular, but there's a state slightly to the north of us, and there's so much competition between the schools. To the point where if you partner with one university, all of a sudden you can't partner with another university. And I don't think we see that in the state at all. And I think that that has been a tremendous benefit to us, especially in the sense that I think the universities are really figuring out how to complement each other, where maybe there's an area where Marshall excels, and then there's a different area where WVU excels. And I think we can use that to figure out, okay, this is a scenario where it makes sense for Marshall to lead this green room. This is a scenario where it makes sense for WVU to lead this effort. So I really have to say, and I'm not just saying that in a biased way, I really am trying to think through, but I really do think we do a phenomenal job of that in the state.
Two quick thoughts if I could. One, I think you have to look at the leadership of President Gee and President Smith. They are peas and carrots, as my mom would say. They get along well. They are going to make sure those institutions stay lockstep. But beyond that, I also think, and very much to your point, you look at the other, higher education institutions and CTCs and other post-secondary offerings, there's a real need to collaborate and partner. And I think a little bit of that is the challenging wolf at the door of enrollment, of their future, of where we're going as we see the tragedy at Alderson brought us. We better start working together or there's going to be a lot less of us. And again, not to bring up in the negative in front of our economic development secretary, we have very poor degree attainment in West Virginia. And I don't believe closing institutions helps us with that. So my concern with that is how do we retool higher education, post-secondary education to better serve us? And I truly believe that collaboration is so critical, especially in the role of economic development. But it is, it's really exciting to see because as someone who's worked in a president's office before, we haven't always had that. But Secretary, you might agree, I think the secret sauce in that collaboration in many cases is Chancellor Tucker at HEPC. I think she is outstanding at keeping everybody together and figuring a way to pass the ammunition and do good things.
And Mr. Carmichael, if you could just follow up on that briefly with from your standpoint, when you're talking with an LG or a Nucor or any of these major international companies, and you have, an R1 research institution at WVU, and you have the former head of Intuit at Marshall now, and they're in the room with you, what difference does that make?
Well, it's a substantial difference, and I would just highlight, the success we've had is the evidence, because we have taken the tours. Many of you have covered the Yes West Virginia tours, in which we've taken a contingent from myself, President Gee, President Smith, Speaker Hanshaw, and President Blair to go visit these entities, go take our show on the road, go visit them, and almost to a person. And some of the venues that we attend in New York, in Seattle, in San Jose, Charlotte, other places, they're so incredibly impressed by the fact you can bring this, divergent groups together, maybe with dissimilar, motivations to promote West Virginia and tell the story of how great our state is to conduct business, to live, work, raise a family, and it really does make an impact.
And folks, if you have questions, please raise. Mark. Yep.
I asked this to the lawmakers when they were here, but how would some of them? There it is. Not that I don't have a booming voice in and of myself. They call me a human megaphone. Anyway, coming up on 50 years in broadcasting. I asked the other panel of this, and I want to know from your perspective, from the business side of it, how important it is that this elimination of the personal sales tax continue on down the road. They did 21% last year. They're due to do another 10% this year, 10% the year after, and then they'll evaluate in the outlying years with the eventual hope of getting rid of the entire personal income tax in this state. How important is that in terms of job recruitment and keeping companies here, and most of all, keeping workers here and attracting workers here?
Well, it's important, right? The tax structure of a state is important, and I think empirically you can look at the evidence and search the high growth states and identify those as the ones that have the lowest or no personal income tax. The governor is very committed to eliminating the personal income tax, putting more money in your pockets, and giving you, rather than government, the opportunity to control the manner in which you spend your resources is paramount in the governor's goal of incentivizing workers, talk about workforce participation, and so forth, the more opportunity that an individual has to keep the hard-earned money that they have worked for is, it's the right thing to do. It incentivizes economic growth, and it creates an ecosystem in which people want to be here, want to move here. By the way, we've already eliminated the tax on veterans' pensions, moving, if not already eliminated, the tax on Social Security. And so we're in a position to now, with this economic growth that we're experiencing, to take those steps and to put money in people's pockets that they've earned. So, yeah, I think it's very important.
Very good. Anyone else have any questions? I have a couple more here, and we have about 10 minutes or so left. So if you do have a question, please ask. I don't want to drag on, but I think this is a fascinating topic. And I guess we can go to, let me question here. If there were one or two things that we could do today without legislative barriers, anything that would impact our ability to bring new employers here, or to better, even better service our existing employers, what would you ask for?
Site preparation. When we are out recruiting companies and so forth, and we're competing, this is it's a sales effort, right? We're competing against other states that have perhaps site-ready, places for which the businesses can come and locate. Businesses make decisions like this, and once they make that decision, they want to be operational as quickly as possible. Many other states have site preparation programs and entities that create the landscape, flatten the area, provide water, sewer, broadband, roads, infrastructure components to even to the point of doing spec buildings and so forth. You pick up any economic development magazine and you will thumb through there and see there's this site, site ready or building ready. So that would be my wish list, on the wish list. And then if I could just take a moment to maybe expand upon another area of our office that really energizes economic growth, and it's broadband expansion. West Virginia has, under this administration, has obtained more funding from the federal government programs, the highest per capita funding in America for the expansion of broadband. And our team that flows through the West Virginia Economic Development Office is world class in identifying the areas and mapping the components that will deliver fiber optic speeds to every address in West Virginia. And so Senator Capito, Senator Manchin have been very instrumental in helping procure those funds. But, that in itself will also drive incredible economic growth for our state. So site prep and continuing the expansion of broadband.
In many ways, I'd echo what Secretary Carmichael said. Like you said, Senator Capito's #1 initiative is broadband deployment through Capito Connect, and it's incredibly frustrating. I mean, it is a foregone conclusion that you have good internet connectivity.
Yeah.
When you don't, you can't do business, but you also can't do telehealth. You can't, take online coursework. You can't sell your products. I mean, everything breaks down. So the more we address that issue, and we could be talking in a matter of a few years, getting that issue addressed. And Stephen, for places like Pendleton County, that's an absolute game changer in creating a playing field that's very, very level compared to what it was before, because our topography can be a challenge. But to the site prep issue, he's exactly right. I used to run a regional chamber on the western side of the state, and we were getting killed on site prep, and Kentucky and Ohio were ready to go. So we'd have this check mark box of what we offer, what they offer, what Ohio and Kentucky offer, but we don't have the flat land. We don't have the archaeological study done. We don't have the water and sewer process, all the things you have to say you can move in and, like he said, start right now. Because that's what they expect. And it is an investment. It is, again, risk, but the reward is tremendous.
Perfect.
I do think it's, maybe one kind of aspect I could add here is I think there's importance too in building in incentives, and there's been great examples of this in the past, but continuing to build in incentives for these companies coming in and wanting to partner with the universities across the state. I mean, I think even something as simple as like, you know, a type of voucher program where the industry partner gets access to. I mean, we've got phenomenal facilities, the RCBI, we've got shared services at WV, or not shared services, but our shared research facilities. Now we have the UIC. There's some really incredible opportunities, and industry, I think, a lot of times likes to pretend like they don't have any problems or they don't need anything else fixed, and I honestly just don't think that's true. I think there's always room for them to improve, and good industry will want to be on the cutting edge, and there's no better way to do that than to partner with the researchers that are doing the cutting edge research. And so I think that's another great opportunity where, again, it benefits the universities, it benefits the partners, and just collectively, I think, brings the whole state together.
Would like to touch just briefly on, and we do just have a few minutes, natural gas development, and it's something that, you know, as we sit and think, hasn't gotten much publicity as of late. You know, we had a cracker plant potential in Wood County a number of years back. You know, one across the river from where I'm at in Ohio County that has kind of fizzled out. Natural gas power plants that kind of fizzle out and don't ever get built. Has it been surprising? And Senator Carmichael, I'll throw this to you to begin with. Has it been surprising, given all that we, you know, again, there's a lot of gas here. There's a lot of wet gas here, a lot of valuable gas in our state. But we're not really seeing a lot of the ancillary development with power plants and other items. Have you been surprised by that? Is that something we still actively pursue?
Yes, it is something we actively pursue, and I guess to answer the first part of your question, I am surprised that we do not have you know, gas-fired power plants in West Virginia. We should. We absolutely should. But the development of our natural resources, our God-given natural resources, is fossil fuel industry is nobody's turning their back on that. We are continuing the efforts to develop the downstream industries. We don't want to be colonized, right, and just take our natural resources and you know, produce you know, high value added products somewhere else. We want to do it here. And so our efforts in the development office are much aligned with that. And but I will also say, you know, as we continue down the process of, you know, honoring and respecting and promoting our valuable natural resources, we also have, you know, provided incentives and work towards incentivizing other companies to do, you know, renewable aspects of, we're an all the above energy state. And so this state, and it's often been said, we mined the coal that, you know, somebody else probably said, mined the coal that forged the steel, that built the bridge, that carried the truck, that won the war, and saved the world for democracy. And that's our heritage and our, you know, strength. We're going to continue to honor that and do so with natural gas, coal, and all natural resources that we have available. And we're also going to walk, you know, confidently into the 21st century with all aspects of energy. So, yeah, great question.
Let me just echo what Secretary Carmichael said. It is unfathomable to me that we sit on this giant natural gas reserve and we don't create electricity with it. And I think the members of the West Virginia Manufacturers Association, you know, see that as, you know, it simply has to happen. And perhaps we have a benefit from our friends in the environmental activist community creating kind of blockades for pipelines with rivers and state boundaries. Perhaps people will have to develop here because you won't be able to pipe it out of the state, which could be an advantage to us. I think we saw that with the Mountain Valley Pipeline. But the other thing I'd mention too is the development of nuclear energy. I think is a natural progression. I remember under the Obama administration, the EPA administrators talking about, you know, if you're going to address climate change, you're going to have nuclear energy. It might be small modular reactors. It may be very unique, but again, that all the above strategy without leaving coal. Metallurgical coal is a tremendous resource. All these new employers that Secretary Carmichael are attracting to West Virginia are going to need steel. And in many cases, that's going to need metallurgical coal. So the opportunities are still there, but I do think you're simply going to need more electricity to create all these products from all these new employers.
I was still without the mic, but like just real quickly, you bring up natural gas and you bring up hydrogen. I'm going to bring up hydrogen. A lot of projects with hydrogen going on right now that have been announced, and that's focusing on use of natural gas and underground storage for the emissions from that. But also tied to that is also there's 50,000-foot view, like how viable is hydrogen right now, particularly as an industry in West Virginia?
Well, I think actually, so I was going to jump in at the end there, but I think this answers your question as well. I think what we need to focus on is diversification. I think that is, honestly, I've said this before to journalists, and I'll say it again because I do stand by it. Natural gas, fossil fuels, we're not going to flip a switch one day and they're going to turn off and we're going to go to completely renewables, right? It's not feasible. There's states that are certainly, I think, moving in that direction extremely quickly. And I don't believe that there has been enough work done to look at the ramifications of that on populations, especially those populations that are already economically distressed. And I think that that is something that West Virginia is doing very well, is we care about our people here in West Virginia. We want to see that as we move forward as a state, we're not leaving people behind. And so I think when we can look at that in the energy sector through diversification. Let's talk about hydrogen. Let's talk about nuclear. Let's talk about natural gas. Where does coal still fit in, right? There's about 100 other options in terms of energy production there. But one thing I do think, and this is an area that we've been working on a good bit recently and trying to build up some more capacity and understanding it, is there's the other side to this, which is also creating more grid resiliency and grid infrastructure security. We're looking at other states, North Carolina, what was it, 6 months ago? Somebody just kind of jokingly shot at a transformer and 100,000 people didn't have power. We have to figure out ways to not only secure our grid infrastructure for events like that, adverse events, bad actors, whatever it might be, but also as we start looking at diversifying our energy input, our energy sources, our grids aren't capable of handling those right now. And so I think we need to, as a state, also be looking at how do we continue to strengthen that and build on that research infrastructure so that when we do start making transitions to, a diversified energy portfolio, our infrastructure is also ready to take that in.
Excellent. One last question over here.
It's hydrogen related. There's talk of the federal government changing the tax incentives for hydrogen projects. We have a lot of along the Ohio River. We've got a lot of stuff going on and elsewhere. How much is that going to impact this?
Yeah, it's very impactful. You can see it at the national level. Interested parties are weighing in on this the Treasury rules as it relates to tax credits and hydrogen production and what's considered green, blue, so forth. So it is, to very specifically answer your question, it's incredibly impactful, and it's making, companies evaluate or take different actions as a result of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any final questions? If not, yes.
You mentioned broadband earlier. I live in states, and I'm kind of like learning all about the different issues that are here. And one of them that popped up when I was learning about broadband.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's been investment in broadband infrastructure, but there's also a lot of complaints about how some of that infrastructure doesn't reach homes without the last mile problem.
Mm.
What that is?
Yeah. Yeah. Like this is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have a complete presentation on this I would love to provide to you, because I could go on for hours about it. But West Virginia has been identified as the state with the best mapping portal. So we know every broadband serviceable location in our state is mapped through our office, and we know exactly how fast and how the speeds that you can obtain there and what type of infrastructure is providing that speed. We had like 280,000 defined by the FCC is not serviced in our state. And hence the result. This mapping portal that we developed was able to procure all these additional federal funds. And so our absolute focus, we don't do anything else other than provide last mile service. We will not fund any project that doesn't, a lot of these states are looking like we're going to just do a publicly owned middle mile or something like. We're not doing that. All of our fundings are, and our programs that we put in place are to go to the last mile with fiber optic technology. And that's, we've already deployed, probably 120 or 130 million dollars worth of funds for last mile service, but we have over $1 billion that will be, providing. So it's a great question, and but our state has this. Where are you from, anyhow? Oh yeah, they don't have broadband either. Yeah, no, but we will leapfrog other states in terms of our connectivity for last mile. So